Hi, my name is Jane E., and today I'm here to present my thesis, Artistic Vision, providing contextual guidance for capture time decisions. So as cameras become more pervasive, people are interested in becoming better photographers. However, currently cameras provide limited aid in improving artistic aspects of a user's photograph. For a novice who's interested in photography but has limited training, the prospects of taking a good photo can be somewhat daunting. There are many photography resources that can help. However, it can be difficult to take the abstract concepts taught by books, for instance, and apply them to your own work. So in education literature, this is referred to as transfer. So it can be challenging to bridge the gap when transferring knowledge you've learned in one context to a completely new context. In-person art practice classes, on the other hand, focus heavily on in-class critiques or crits. So while a portion of these in-person classes will be about reading the literature and understanding existing art, much of it will be about getting out and practicing, and then most importantly, having these in-class crits. These crits are super helpful for getting feedback on how to directly apply techniques you've learned in readings to your own work, therefore closing the knowledge transfer gap. So here you can see how visualizing some abstract compositional ideas can make them feel more concrete and actionable. Inspired by these in-class critique sessions, we believe that the camera viewport is prime real estate for providing photographers with artistic feedback. In this way, we want to further close this feedback loop so photographers can use this information in the moment as they explore the scene and make decisions about their photos. In particular, we're inspired by the fact that experts have trained their eyes to see in a certain way. So as they look at an image, they know how to scan the scene to make sure they're aware of different potential ideas or mistakes. And as a result, they can be very intentional about their different artistic choices, despite the wide range of options presented in front of them. Novices, on the other hand, might not know where to put their attention or what to consider when framing a photo. So we wondered if we could help novices see in these different ways as well, if they might be able to have access to the range of artistic choices that experts have available to them. And so this idea is what inspired my thesis title, Artistic Vision. Therefore, in my thesis, we designed capture time interfaces to visualize key artistic concepts with the goal of helping novices develop this artistic vision. So for novices, personal creativity and satisfaction is most important. Therefore, we care about promoting creativity and improving self-assessed photo quality. So throughout this talk, when I refer to novices, I don't assume any level of experience, but I do assume the mindset of having interest in working towards developing expertise. So in my thesis, I demonstrate this idea through 3 camera interfaces that focus on 3 different photographic concepts: lighting, composition, and finally, declutter. So specifically in my work, I contribute new camera guidance interfaces implemented as prototype capture time tools. For each tool, I design novice interpretable visual overlays to represent the considerations for a key artistic concept and realize them through real-time algorithms for generating these visualizations. Before I get into the details of each interface, I want to talk through some of our formative studies that informed the design of those interfaces. We conducted a survey with 127 participants with an interest in photography and asked them what types of feedback might help them in camera. We then did 9 in-depth interviews with experienced photographers about their current practices and tools. Many survey participants expressed that they appreciated the individualized and immediate feedback of in-person classes or even going on a photo walk with more experienced friends. So this enables reviewing and adjusting while still in the context of their current photo. Both survey participants and experts were interested in new ideas, especially suggestions for larger changes, as they preferred to only make smaller framing adjustments while editing. Finally, both also expressed concern that the interface might be too distracting and disruptive. Survey participants were concerned that it would slow down their photographic process. This was especially important in situations with time pressure, such as when capturing a fleeting moment or when traveling with a group. Meanwhile, experts emphasized the need to maintain creative freedom. Nonetheless, around 90% of survey participants were willing to spend an extra couple of seconds, if not minutes, on capture time guidance in order to get a higher quality result. Many experts also described consistently using a number of overlays on their camera, from leveling assistance to light metering, etc., and not feeling like these limited their creative flexibility. We take inspiration from these existing overlays to design our interfaces. Thus, these became our 3 design goals. We want to design guidance that is context-aware and able to adapt to the current scene. The guidance should support exploration by helping photographers discover new ideas. And finally, the guidance should not hinder the creative freedom or flexibility of the photographer. So now I'll review some related work in the context of these goals. I'll also refer back to them as I describe our own design decisions later on. Recent developments in graphics and vision have been quite helpful in producing aesthetically improved images. These examples here include automatically cropping a photo, removing distractors, or transferring lighting styles. However, much of the related work in this area focuses on automated workflows, which can somewhat detach users from the creative experience of taking a photo. We can see that each of these is indeed context aware. In fact, a lot of work is put into trying to recover the context in the image. They also do allow users to quickly explore a wide range of options for their image. However, the options are still limited by the already fixed content of the image. Additionally, some guided photography interfaces do exist, such as those shown here. So these tools guide you to a specific better option. On the left, to a specific composition, and on the right, to achieve what it defines as a good selfie. These tools have an internal model of aesthetics, but they're mostly hidden from the user and apply this model without providing much explanation. By imposing a specific suggestion from the tool, they limit exploration and creative flexibility. Since in our formative studies, experts mentioned using a variety of existing in-camera tools, we also took a closer look at what made these tools useful. The light meter, for example, attempts to evaluate if the current image is properly exposed. The photographer uses this information to adjust the camera to achieve better overall lighting. However, also note that a photographer can choose to intentionally over or underexpose the image based on this feedback. So I personally tend to like to capture images a little darker than is suggested by the light meter. We take inspiration from these existing tools to design our guidance interfaces. So even with just the information from the light meter, there are infinite parameters that you could change to address this feedback. Let's walk through some of the decisions a photographer might be making while taking this portrait. The photographer notices that the lighting is very dark on her subject's face. She has in mind a few lighting styles that she likes to use, and guides her subject to orient to achieve the one that she likes. Next, she composes the subject relative to the objects in the background. So the image is currently centered, and she places the subject at the top left thirds. But there's this bright orange bag in the photo. Instead, she adjusts the composition to place the subject at the top right thirds to remove the distracting clutter from the background and takes the photo. Going back to the lighting, I'll now walk you through each of the interfaces that we've designed to assist with this process. So the photo starts out very backlit. Rotating the subject in place, the photographer is able to achieve this style called loop, which I will describe shortly. So for portrait lighting, the important context is the lighting in the environment. To encourage exploration, we want to make sure users are aware of the lighting style options in the context of their current environment, and that they have flexibility to choose between these different options. Here, the lighting style is called loop. It's characterized by the strong light on the right side of the face and the triangle on the left cheek. So to create this look, the photographer carefully set up the studio as shown in the top-down diagram to the left. The light source is precisely angled to the right side and slightly above the face to form the desired key triangle. So here's a more dramatic look called badger, characterized by the shadow along the center line of the face. It requires 2 lights placed slightly behind the face. Portrait photographers have designed many such portrait lighting setups. Here's a poster showing a number of them. However, most novices don't know about these different lighting options or how to create them. Consider taking a portrait in a natural environment like this one. Can we still achieve these studio-like lighting styles without studio lights? In many such cases, you can achieve a wide range of looks just by having the subject rotate to different angles in place. For these situations, we built a prototype interactive capture time tool that would guide photographers through the steps of exploring and choosing a lighting style and reorienting their subject to achieve their desired style. Now, let's say we're using this tool to take this portrait. Our approach consists of these 3 steps. First, the photographer has to capture the environment map. So we use a 360 camera to capture the environment. In the next step, we allow the user to choose a lighting style from a gallery of pre-designed options based on studio portrait setups. So taking inspiration from the earlier poster, we recreated a number of those lighting styles using virtual setups. And then taking in the context of the current environment, the tool calculates the optimal angles for each lighting style and previews these best matches to the user. It's also able to determine some styles that it finds to be currently unattainable. These are displayed to the user in gray. Now let's say we pick butterfly, a relatively evenly lit lighting style. This takes us to the next step, where the tool will now guide us to properly reorient in the scene in order to best capture the butterfly target. So following the guidance on the interface, the photographer guides the subject to turn a little less than 90 degrees clockwise. Once we're at the right orientation, we take the photo, giving us the even lighting of the butterfly style. Thinking about our design goals, the first is that the feedback should be context aware. So in this case, we captured the most important context, the lighting in the environment. By presenting the user with these many options at once, they can easily scan the gallery to preview what the end result might look like. The user has flexibility to choose between these styles. I won't go into the details in the talk, but for additional flexibility, we also allow customization of target lighting styles. So how do we compute these orientations? So here, our current lighting is estimated by render B. In order to compute an optimal angle, we need to be able to determine how close the current lighting is to the target lighting style I want to achieve, which here is loop. Looking at lighting similarity, the key is relative regions of light and dark. Thus, for a given studio lighting style, we need to transform it into a representation of its light and dark regions. We generate this weighting function f of x, where for each pixel x, a positive value or orange means that you want more light, and a negative value or blue means you want less light. So once we have this orange and blue weighting function, we use it to generate a score indicating how similar the current lighting is to this target style, and that we call our quality metric. And then here is the environment map L corresponding to the render B. We've walked through how to compute the quality for a given environment. So at this orientation, the quality metric is 289 for this specific target studio lighting. We can rotate the environment map to compute a new quality value. Notice that this rotation of the environment map is equivalent to rotating the subject. For this target and environment, 23 degrees is the optimal orientation. Here, our quality metric is maximized with a value of 332. For this scene, we also have the corresponding photos at these angles. And so as we scrub through other rotations, notice how the light changes. At the lowest values, the light is on the other side of the face. Looking more carefully at this loop result, we can see the characteristic key triangle both on the face and the renders on the right. And here we show another result for the loop lighting style. This demonstrates the ability of our tool to handle nighttime scenes. Now let's look at another studio lighting style, left rim, with a strong contour on the left side of the face. So in this photo, notice the desired highlight on the contour of the face, characteristic of rim lighting. We're also able to capture the rim along this subject's face in an indoor scene. We ran a user study with 28 participants to evaluate the usefulness of our tool and the quality of the resulting photos. We asked participants to capture 3 well-lit portraits, first using no tool, then using a static reference image and showing the studio lighting styles, and then manually reorienting, and then finally using our tool. They found our tool significantly more useful than the other 2 methods and generated better lit portraits. Participants liked that they were able to capture different lighting styles. I was more intentional about lighting and the environment my subject was in. I only really knew about one lighting style before this. I really liked that it gave me an assortment of different lighting options and told me which were possible in the given environment. I never realized how many there were to choose from. Another participant said, I liked that it made me think beyond just the content of the photo and also pay attention to where the light sources are. It makes me feel like I can take much more dramatic and varied photos in a limited space. By representing portrait lighting as a discrete set of lighting styles and corresponding reorientation angles, we were able to allow participants to consider varied lighting styles in the context of the current scene. Using the tool, participants were able to explore through a gallery of lighting styles, pick their desired style, and ultimately achieve results that they believed were of better quality. Next, we'll move on to composition. To review, here the photographer makes just a slight adjustment to go from a centered portrait to one where the subject is at the top left thirds. So for composition, the context we want to consider is the relative positioning of objects within the frame. Exploring composition can involve moving around the camera to try out different angles and framing, as well as moving the objects in frame. Users should have creative flexibility in choosing whatever compositions they find appealing. One common way of describing composition is using composition grids like the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds suggests that it can often be better to place the subject around the thirds lines rather than centered, like the door in this image. So here's another image with the rule of thirds grid overlaid. For these images, these are the more relevant lines as they align with important objects or boundaries in the images. However, the rule of thirds is rather restrictive and can only describe a small set of compositional elements. Notice in these images, there are many other strong lines that aren't being described by the rule of thirds. In addition to thirds, there are other proportions that are known to be visually pleasing. So the harmonic armature is a composition grid that encompasses a variety of these proportions, such as halves and quarters, formed by these intersecting diagonals. This can describe a wider range of compositions. I would probably pick these as the most relevant lines for describing these compositions, but as you can see, many lines are reasonable. It can be overwhelming to find these alignments and interpret composition with these more complex grids. Here are some images annotated by professional photographers to explain composition in blog posts and books. Photographers will walk through different aspects of a photo, highlighting the relevant subsets of lines as they go. So this helps focus the attention of the readers. We wanted to automate this process and show these highlighted lines as overlays directly in the camera. But first, we wanted to understand if such a tool would be useful for novices, and if so, how to best design it. Specifically, there are many ways to represent composition. We wondered if highlighting lines in a composition grid, like the harmonic armature, was a helpful representation for users to interpret composition. And if so, how to decide what lines are most relevant to highlight. To answer this, we ran a Mechanical Turk study where we had workers annotate 10 images per task after some basic training on what composition is. They were asked to select 1 to 4 lines from the harmonic armature that best describe the composition of the physical elements in the image. So here are some worker annotations. From these annotations, we picked the most commonly annotated lines as ground truth. So here are two other ground truth annotations. Notice that workers are selecting lines that intersect with salient regions or regions of strong visual attention. So in the left image, lines intersect with the water droplet, in the middle with the animal's eye, and on the right, along the boundaries of the landscape. We also actually got feedback from the workers expressing that they found the task to be fun. So we've learned that novices do indeed find the task of annotating photo composition by highlighting lines in a composition grid to be useful and approachable. They were also relatively consistent in their annotations and highlighted lines through areas of visual saliency. Thus, we wanted to design an algorithm that would adaptively select the most visually salient lines of the harmonic armature. In order to do so, we needed to give each line a score based on its proximity to visually salient regions in the image. We started by computing a per pixel saliency map. For each line of the 14 lines in the armature, we generate a Gaussian mask along the line and multiply each one by the saliency map. Summing up the per pixel product gives us a score for each line. We denote the lines with the top 3 scores as our adaptive armature. For each of these lines, here's the previously shown ground truth mechanical Turk annotation compared to our saliency-based adaptive armature. Notice that the ground truth often has 2 selected lines. We chose to highlight 3 in order to provide more ideas to the user as they use the tool. So here's our capture time tool. It overlays these relevant lines or adaptive armatures on the camera viewfinder. Here, the saliency algorithm is detecting that the green object on the bench is salient and is selecting lines that intersect with it to represent the current composition. Looking back at our design goals, here we are using saliency to capture the relevant context of the image. By showing grid lines, we hope that users could more easily think about possible composition options and that the highlights especially might help them understand their current composition or consider new composition options while still attending to other aspects of the photo. Finally, the highlights are meant to represent the current composition choices rather than impose a new composition. So users can choose to intentionally align or misalign with the grid, but we chose the harmonic armature as the underlying grid to just be able to support alignment to a wider range of compositions. We ran a study with 24 participants to understand if the tool would help users capture photos that they believed were more well composed, and if users felt creative while using the tool. Users experienced 2 different conditions of the tool. One with a static composition grid, and a second dynamically highlighting our adaptive armatures. Participants completed 6 photo tasks, 3 at each of 2 locations. So the tasks were designed to increase in scale and complexity and to correspond in style across the 2 locations. We counterbalanced location and condition to avoid biases due to location preferences or learning effects. In both static and adaptive conditions, we saw participants snapping elements in the image to lines or points on the composition grid. For example, this participant places the subject of the photo at these different intersection points. Notice how she jumps from one intersection point to the next. Here, the participant aligns the edges of the building to various vertical lines on the grid, along the center, and now the thirds, and the other thirds line. And notice how he pauses at the lines to refine each alignment and examine the composition. Here are a couple photos that participants captured using the static guidance. And here are a few captured using the adaptive guidance. Notice the range of compositions and camera angles. So looking back at our user study results, we found that participants indeed believed the photos that they captured with the adaptive guidance were better composed. In terms of the creative process, we heard a lot of qualitative support suggesting that users felt like the tool encouraged them to explore new creative ideas and made them feel confident in their ability to compose photos. So let's watch some participants from the summative study in action, framing their shots. Here, we see how seeing these different highlighted lines gave participants new ideas to explore.
I want this, the side of the bench to align with the diagonal that was highlighted.
She goes on to say that she actually didn't see it fit into this corner until the line on the screen showed up. The highlighting also provided confirmation to the participants, making them more confident in their photos.
Okay, I see the lines that I want lighting up. So this looks good.
Oh yeah, it's really nice because the lines like go through the Bulbasaur.
With respect to our design goals, we aim to reflect the composition of the current camera angle image with the highlights in the grid. So these high-level grid representations made it easier to explore the space of possible compositions and also highlighted new composition ideas for participants to try. Users have flexibility in how they respond. They can choose to better align to these highlighted lines, align with different lines, or intentionally misalign elements relative to the grid. Finally, we'll address decluttering the image. So upon noticing the bright orange bag, the photographer adjusts the composition of the image in order to remove this from the background, placing the subject now at the top right thirds of the image to achieve the final portrait. For decluttering, the important context to consider is what will draw the viewer's attention. Exploring how to declutter an image involves considering how elements of the image contribute to the overall story and what might focus or distract. In particular, it might involve trying out different backgrounds that better highlight the focal subject or removing objects that take attention away from the focal subject. Users should have flexibility to decide how they want to present the story. It can be incredibly frustrating if you take a photo only to realize after the fact that there's some unwanted clutter in the background that distracts from the main focus of the image. Notice here in the left image, the subject blends into the pattern behind it. And in the right image, there are unwanted objects along the left border. Reframing to clarify the subject and remove these distractors really helps improve these images and better directs the viewer's eyes. So our eyes are drawn to regions of high contrast. So light and dark, dark on light. Thus contrast around the subject will clarify and declutter the overall image. It's called subject background separation. Whereas contrast in other regions, especially the border of the image, will distract, causing the eyes to be attracted away from the focal subject, called image border flicker. Photographers recommend a number of methods to be able to more easily see the contrast in an image. For example, they recommend squinting at the image to see a blurred and higher contrast version of the image, or looking at the image in grayscale to focus on contrast without aspects of color. On the right, the photographer draws a line around the subject. Areas where contrast maybe is too low between the subject and background are shown as gaps. So looking back at our earlier examples, here are the images with subjects outlined in this way. So you may notice from the right image that this outlining method doesn't really do anything to highlight image border flicker. Inspired by this idea of using outlines to highlight contrast and lack of contrast, we hope to recreate this outlining as an overlay directly in the camera, also extending it to contrast along the image borders. So given an image, our tool detects edges throughout the image. However, we want to be able to focus on edges related to the subject background separation and the image border flicker. In particular, we need to identify a border around the subject. So we realized we could estimate the image subjects using object-based saliency maps. These are different from those that we used for the composition, as they try to identify entire objects rather than just general regions of visual attention. So given this saliency map, we segment the image into regions describing the subject border, the image border, and the remaining background. These segmentations are then used to classify and color code the edges. Yellow designates edges within and around the subject, cyan for edges around the image border, and white for the remaining background edges. We merge these to form two edge-based overlays, one showing all edges color-coded at the top right, and the other only showing the relevant edges around the subject and image borders at the bottom. So here's the resulting tool in action. So by default, the app shows edges just around the subject and image borders with this black background. The user can adjust the slider at the top to bring in more or less of the image color. They can use the toggle to bring in the remaining edges of the subject and in the subject and background. They can also turn off the visualization by holding a finger down anywhere on the screen or using the toggle on the bottom right. So we found in the composition study that even though we provided such a toggle, people rarely used it to turn the visualization completely off. And so we added the ability to more easily switch back and forth by touching anywhere on the screen. As I just described, we use edge detection to capture edges of objects in the frame. We additionally use saliency to try to capture the context of how these edges relate to important subjects in the photo. By drawing attention to the subject-background relationship and the image borders, we hope that this might encourage users to consider these when exploring different ways of framing their subject. Users can use this information to decide whether or not highlighted objects should be in the final image. So given this tool, we wanted to understand if it could help users capture more clear and decluttered photos, and if users felt creative while using the tool. So from our composition study, we liked how the difference in scale resulted in a range of complexity while composing. Since we needed to run remote studies, we decided to keep that structure of having 3 tasks per condition at different scales, but having participants choose their own subjects to take photos of. So again, participants completed 6 photo tasks, 3 at each of 2 locations of their choosing. So here are a few participant photos for each task to give you a sense of differences in scale for these tasks. Since locations were all different, here we just counterbalanced condition to avoid biases due to learning effects. So as noted before, photographers sometimes suggest looking at a photo in grayscale to focus on overall contrast. So in fact, many mentioned that they currently use grayscale in their camera, even for taking colored photos. Therefore, we compared our tool against this method that photographers currently employ as our baseline. We ran remote studies over Zoom if the tool would help users declutter photos and if users felt creative while using the tool. Users experienced 2 different conditions of the tool, one using a grayscale overlay, and a second highlighting edges along the subject and image borders. For each photo, we asked participants to self-assess them based on subject background separation and image border flicker. We actually did not see a significant improvement in overall quality in terms of these principles. However, participants did believe that the tool was helpful for the task of capturing clear and decluttered images. It also made them feel more confident in their ability to address the decluttering principles of subject background separation and image border flicker. Participants described feeling like they could take fewer photos because they could be more confident in each photo that they took. Usually when I take photos, I take a ton at once, but didn't do that here. I didn't need to because I was being so precise. I noticed myself reconsidering the composition more, e.g., should I have these things in the edges? Here, you can see this participant refines the camera angle until the edges in the overlay look as she wants. She's watching the hook on the top left, making sure it doesn't end up in her shot.
Potentially a distractor in the photo, And so I'm trying to angle my phone so that it doesn't catch that in there. Yep.
In addition to encouraging confidence, we found the tool further encouraged creativity through exploring the space in new ways. It was really helpful with how I take photos because normally it's just snap and done. This one was more like, can I move things out of the background? Can I move the subject to frame it to not have a distracting background? Another thing that I don't normally do is pivot the camera and usually just move within a flat plane. Another participant said, it caused me to experiment more. I didn't see it as a rule that I needed to minimize lines, but the tool made it easy to move around and check, by that metric, how good it was. So here you can see how an unexpected edge highlight encourages a participant to explore different backgrounds and compositions. So this participant notices an unwanted edge at the bottom of the plant from the stovetop. So she tries out different camera angles to remove the stove, but notices a dark panel in the background, which she doesn't want. She then turns the camera back towards the white wall, but notices the high contrast object at the top left entering her shot. An interaction that we didn't expect that emerged from the studies was that participants used the tool's ability to identify subjects to assess how someone might view their photos. This participant observes that the tool jumps back and forth in its highlighting of a subject. So she interprets this to mean that there is no clear subject in her photo and confirms that this is actually consistent with her own perception. Therefore, she tries to find a different way to capture this room with a more clear subject. This participant, on the other hand, had a slightly different interpretation of the lack of a consistent subject, or in this case, no identified subject. So he decided that since the large-scale task shouldn't have a single focal subject, the lack of yellow aligned with this goal. Our edge-based overlay distilled the concept of declutter down to the principles of subject-background separation and image border flicker, specifically in the context of the current image, and helped draw focus away from the subject itself to the surrounding regions. This visualization helped participants quickly explore different backgrounds and angles for capturing a subject and ultimately feel more confident in their photos. The difference in the way the last two participants used the feedback also shows that this overlay did allow for flexible interpretation. In many cases, we saw participants notice highlighted edges and consciously decide that they felt like the potential noise was okay to keep. So we've now walked you through this photographer's process in capturing this portrait and presented each of our interfaces and how they enable a novice user to consider the decisions behind each of these steps. With our lighting tool, a novice could choose amongst a number of lighting styles and reorient to achieve their desired style. The composition tool would highlight the centered composition and help confirm alignment to a new composition. Finally, the decluttering tool would further emphasize the orange bag, as well as highlight the edge of the wall on the right border of the image. We've learned a lot from our experiences, and I'm excited to continue thinking about how these camera interfaces can improve. For instance, how might we design an interface that combines these tools and understands maybe when you focus on one photography concept versus another? And especially with these visualizations combined, how do you make sure that the interface isn't too overwhelming? I would also be interested in understanding how we might come up with better quantitative metrics for evaluating this type of work. For example, could we maybe use the motions of the camera or the user's gaze to measure behavior change in the photographic process? Or how we might be able to measure creative growth and learning. Finally, I'm excited to try to apply some of these design goals and ideas that we used here for photography to other creative domains. Can we similarly develop artistic vision for things like graphic design or fabrication? So today, I presented to you our 3 interfaces for capture time guidance. We talked through the motivation, design, algorithmic implementation, and evaluation of each of these tools. I hope that through these projects, I've shown you that visualizing key artistic concepts in the camera can allow novice users to see their image in new ways. This can help them feel more creative and produce photos that they like more. I'd like to thank my advisors, mentors, and committee members for all their support throughout this journey and for helping shape this work. I'll miss getting Slack messages from James asking if I'm back from vacation because he heard laughter from the hallway, and Pat excitedly pointing out a single particularly beautiful pixel or sharing his latest artistic creations. I'll miss spontaneous conversations with Manish during his frequent visits to our office about topics ranging from fancy food to making viral videos, and eating through an endless supply of duck and bows with Ga, and an endless supply of drinks at the D Lounge. Thanks to Ohad and his constant supply of snark, I'll always remember to judge myself for overly large PDF files and overthinking minor details, but also thank you, really. Thanks to Jose for being an amazingly supportive mentor with an incredible artistic flair, who is willing to hop on a call with me at 7 p.m. to calm my nerves before a weekend of user studies. And thank you, Scott, for being here today. Thank you for believing in me and for the time and effort you've already invested in me. I look forward to learning and growing with you in your lab in the coming years. Thank you so much to my lab mates and my good friends in the PhD. You've been there with me every step of the way. Thank you for all of your valuable feedback. So many of you have been so generous with your time and spent countless hours helping me with my work. But most of all, thank you for your friendship and for making the PhD such a special and rich experience. Coming in, I wasn't looking to make too many new friends in grad school, but I know I'll be eternally grateful for the bonds that we've formed. Well, I can't talk anymore. I'll treasure the memories of general silliness and gates, from Nerf gun wars to sitting in boxes to accumulating stuffed animals, to Griffin's little surprise dances and animal imitations in the hallway, just for me to see. A special thanks to An for keeping me sane in the days leading up to deadlines, staying up with me many nights in a row, helping me with figures and assembling paper submissions. You were there with me through some of the toughest times in the PhD, and I really don't know how I would have done it without you. Thank you to Extreme for welcoming me into your dance family. I'm so grateful to have had an opportunity to learn from and grow with each of you. Thank you to my friends from all other walks of life. Thank you all for being here today and just generally always being there for me. You're some of the most considerate and thoughtful people around, and I feel so lucky to call you my friends. I was rather bummed to not be able to defend in person, but being able to have you all here makes it infinitely better. Thank you, Alex, for being my co-working buddy over the past several weeks and providing me with your very godmotherly love and encouragement as I push to finish this talk. And Steve for fueling me with a mountain of yummy surprise pastries. I think I was 90% pastry by the end of that day. Thank you, Chris and Viv, for being my quarantine family and for giving me something to look forward to each week and feeding me so much delicious food and beer. And thank you, Matthew, my student buddy and first collaborator at Stanford. And so much more. You're the real MVP. Thank you for everything you did behind the scenes, keeping me happy and fed. Thank you for always making sure my favorite foods were in the fridge and for taking me to Disneyland more times than I can count. Thanks to my family for always supporting me in my academic as well as creative endeavors. As a family, we took a trip to New York City on the coldest day of winter that year because I wanted to take photos of benches at Central Park for my photography class. And then again for my research, we spent many hours in the New Jersey winter wandering around campus to take portraits with different types of lighting. I truly would not be where I am without you. I want to thank my advisors again. I'm so grateful for the relationship that I have with my advisors. Even more than research advisors, they were my life advisors for the past 6 years. From watching both of you, I've learned so much about the type of person I want to be. I didn't know what I did to deserve your time and trust, but your unwavering support and willingness to invest in me has helped me become the person I am today. I hope that someday I can have that kind of impact on someone's career and life. And some bonus photos, because I really have had just such amazing mentors throughout this PhD. Finally, I want to thank a mentor who has a very special place in my heart. Lorraine passed away while I was interning with her at Adobe after my first year. Despite having only known her for a short while, she's had an immeasurable impact on my life. A few days into the internship, I remember calling my parents and excitedly telling them that I found a mentor that I was really hoping to work with for the rest of my PhD. And while she hasn't been able to physically be there, even today, sometimes when I feel like giving up, thinking about her and how much she believed in me gives me the strength to keep going. I wish I could have had more time with you to share in our love of dance and chocolate and to celebrate our birthday together. And with that, I'll end my talk. Thank you all for listening and for being here today. I'll now take any questions. Thank you.
And we are now all extremely self-aware of the lighting on our Zoom. Anyone who's a panelist, feel free to unmute yourself. This is, I guess, considered the public part of the Q&A for the dissertation defense. If you're a Stanford student, I'll resend back out the link for submitting a question. And we have a few minutes for questions here. So go ahead.
They're still applauding, so we'll wait till the applause goes down.
You could read out the URL too, Michael.
We're just waiting for the claps to go down, and then they'll ask questions. Okay.
Oh, I have one question.
We have one question I can ask over the clapping. Who's asking how visual saliency gets calculated in the composition study, and whether the users ever felt like their desired subject wasn't correctly identified by the metric.
Yeah, we just use Apple has these two built-in saliency algorithms. One is more attention and gaze based, and one is object based. So we use the first one for the composition study. And yeah, we gave them a little bit of training so that they could kind of understand how the app was working, but definitely it's not always on point. But that, like, having that training allows them to kind of interpret what's going on under the scene. And it also, like, sometimes as a result would highlight subjects that maybe they didn't realize were of such like strong visual attention, and that would also actually help them like learn to like think to remove it or to like use it in their composition. So some of that serendipity was also helpful in their exploration.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
This is great. I guess I want to really quickly talk about the composition app. Unfortunately, this is the first I'm seeing it, which that's too bad because it's great. My question is from an interaction perspective. My initial thought would be someone would want to keep, once they find 3 lines that they like, they would want to just freeze those lines and then do tweaks afterwards. But in the app, it's constantly changing and re-optimizing the lines. Can you comment on that decision a little bit?
Yeah, we definitely thought about doing something like that, like saying, okay, I have a composition in mind, let me like select those lines, and then it'll like turn more green or something as you're like more and more aligned. I think I was just excited about getting a sense of how generating these ideas might help you explore the space rather than maybe refining a specific composition. But that's definitely something that I'd be interested in also looking at.
Gotcha, thanks.
We also had a slider at the top if you wanted to slow it down so that you could keep something on for a little longer. Yeah.
Great job, Jane. Super interesting, really well explained. The question was, if someone wanted to use all 3 of the tools to take a photo, would the recommended order be the way it was presented, lighting, and then composition, and then declutter? And I guess if that is, I guess how that sequence was determined.
Yeah, kind of. I think, yeah, with lighting, because that one kind of guides you to really reorient. And so once you've reoriented, everything that's in your scene is going to be really different. So decluttering and composing before isn't necessarily the most helpful. Composition and declutter, I think, are a little bit more linked. Like as you saw in the little walkthrough I did, it like noticing some clutter really changed the choice in composition there. And I wanted to kind of illustrate that those might kind of move back and forth. And you're kind of touching on exactly what I was saying was one of the future work things I was interested in. It is kind of interesting to think about, like when one is the priority versus the other. Like sometimes if you really want a certain composition, you want to first compose that and then just like move things out of the scene. But other times, clutter can't be moved. And so you have to kind of work around it and compose. So yeah, it's definitely also something I'm interested in looking at more.
We have a question also from an attendee who asks, did you investigate the impact of the tools on the novice's photographs as evaluated by the experienced photographer?
Yeah, well, our evaluation was self-assessed. So they would rate I had them just rate each of their photos based on like how well composed, how well lit, how decluttered, etc. the images were. And so then we just compared like with and without the condition. And for everything besides the declutter, it did seem to help. I think with declutter, it's actually like a more difficult and unfamiliar kind of concept and task than the other two. And so even when people were maybe focused on removing something near the image border, sometimes it would still creep into the photo. And so I think that's something that maybe like with longer, a longer kind of time with the app or just more experience with it, like I do see maybe the quality could improve, but they did see that they felt more confident in that.
And I think the question was also interested, the question was also interested in what do you think you would see if you had a professional photographer look at these and not just self-assessment?
I see. Yeah, we did have some like preliminary tests with like expert evaluation. We didn't see too much of a signal there. And I think that does have to do with just like everyone has different creative intentions and style choices. And so it is kind of difficult to have an expert evaluate that. And what we care about more is really just like, are you happy with the photo you've taken? Do you feel like you're able to start kind of determining what your artistic style is using these tools and stuff like that? So I did kind of just prioritize more the self assessment part for that reason.
Great, and we have time for one more question.
Hi, thank you for a great talk. I was wondering for the earlier on in the rule of thirds when you had the mask, you had a Gaussian mask to overlay over the image, and later on when you had the border highlighted in blue, was there something that determined the width of this masking, or are the results fairly independent, or is the effectiveness fairly independent of how these are set?
Sorry, what did you mean? What masking and the rule of thirds? Sorry, I
think when you're processing the image to get the lines, you're overlaying a mask with a particular
like a saliency mask?
Yeah, exactly. And also the border size too.
Yeah. So the rule of thirds thing, I didn't actually show a mask with saliency. There is like just some sort of underlying one that determines, how I'm computing scores. And I didn't determine that. Apple just kind of does it in their algorithm. So I just used what they already did. And that is just based on where they think, gaze will be. And then, but the width of the Gaussian mask, is that what you're asking that I use?
Yeah, like I was wondering if that would pick up or miss different features in the image depending on how large they were.
Yeah, I think I could make the mask wider or narrower to just capture more. I picked something where it would potentially also help with alignment, but wouldn't capture just only along the line or something wouldn't require like too much. So yeah, I think that could change the scores, but just kind of picked an average thing there. And then for the image border thing as well, it was very much like a visual. I just thought, that kind of mostly captured a lot of borders and was enough for people to really see, because if it was too narrow, it'd be hard to notice. And if it were too wide, it would just be kind of noisy.